Hello and welcome to this Business New Zealand update for Thursday the 15th of April. I'm Grant Walker and I'm joined by Business New Zealand CEO Kirk. Well, it's been a couple of weeks since we last spoke, since then the announcement of the Trans-Tasman bubble. A bit of time now to analyse it. It starts 4 days from now. Is business ready?
Yeah, I think business was probably ready quite a few months ago. Most of the plans had been in place. If you think about it from an airline and an airport perspective around running green and red zones, it's not. They didn't have to create this. Many other countries around the world have been thinking about this stuff. So there's no doubt that most businesses who will be impacted are ready to receive the hundreds of thousands of Australian tourists that we're expecting to see, which will be fantastic. But there's also, there is a component of it that will be New Zealanders who haven't been able to see necessarily friends and family. And there are approximately 500,000 New Zealanders living in Australia. So a lot of this stuff will be about the family reconnections without having to do the MIQ. So that's also a really important component of how you think about managing through, particularly some of the well-being aspects of COVID.
But there was that initial, because we heard from the Chief Executive of New Zealand saying the biggest rush they've ever had, business were clapping their hands. But if you sit there and analyse it, is it family first, who aren't necessarily going to be spending money in the tourist areas that they need to be spending, and then business people travel maybe before the tourists hit? There are bookings for the ski season, but that's not here yet.
Yeah, so interesting. They've broken down the number of people who are travelling here for tourism reasons, and it's up on what the historical trend has been. So that is an important, and you're right. That's not immediately, but that is for the period over the ski season, and we just had the first dump of snow down south. So that's again, hopefully another thing which will help the incomes of some of those businesses down there. I think you'll see quite a demand from the Australian market. Australians purportedly saved around $200 billion over COVID. They've got nowhere really else to travel in the world. So I think you can expect to see them come here. Quite a lot of them come here. I think one of the challenges for the industry will be, how to go from zero back up to about 50% capacity pretty quickly, because the Australian market was around 40%, maybe 35%, 40% of our tourism market. You'd expect that 40% to be a bit higher, or the number of people to increase by volume, simply because there are limits on where else they can go in the world. So it will. I think the challenging thing will be to find the people actually to run the hotels. We've got a shortage of chefs in New Zealand. Those types of things will be critical, and we don't want people to have bad experiences, because we want them to come back. This is an ongoing kind of. This is just not a one-off. We need it to keep continuing.
But that comes down to that question: are they ready? Because are there enough people on the ski fields? Are there enough snow groomers? You mentioned chefs. Are there enough waiting staff? And what happens is that they're asking the government to let more people in, but the PR is bad, because you get New Zealanders saying, well, chefs, they're not, we don't need chefs, come here, but we just simply haven't got enough. And most people don't know that industry relied on overseas chefs and overseas people to help us.
Yeah, and I think, some of that gap has been filled. Some of it's been filled with people who continue to train, or who were continuing to train over COVID and during the course of last year. Some of it there will be gaps. There's no doubt about it. Some of it will be covered through critical workers who can bring back in, but we will have to make sure, I think, that we have an effective migration policy to fill those gaps, particularly like with the horticultural and agricultural industries. We don't want to leave fruit on the ground, because we don't.
But we are at the moment.
Yep, I know, and we don't want to have to do that.
And a lot of this continuation still relies too on the vaccines and where we are. We know that the government want about 1 million vaccines to have been administered by June, and that's going to involve a lot of changes. Is that also going to involve a lot of businesses, and how can they help with that?
Yeah, look, I think the government will be starting to communicate how and what it needs and wants from business in the next few weeks. There's no doubt that there will be some large-scale businesses who can play a really big role in rolling out the vaccine and deploying it, not only for their own workforces but for others. There there are businesses in the healthcare sector and the aged care sector who will have the capacity to be able to support the vaccine rollout, and it'll be important for them to be involved and have clear rules, I think, around that across the country. So, the DHBs, I think, are tasked with deploying the rules around the vaccine. We're just going to make sure that's all consistent.
Now, what about hotels? Because a lot of them are being used as MIQ facilities. The government's ruled out that it's going to build any more, so it'll be continuing to use certainly some outfits. And also there's those hotels where homeless people have been put at the moment, and others as well. So have we actually got enough accommodation, or what are you wanting to see in that area?
Yeah, the government hasn't ruled out looking at purpose-built MIQ facilities. I think the case hasn't really been strong thus far. I think it probably depends on their assessment of how the ventilation systems in hotels have worked. They weren't built for quarantining. Is there a better way to manage that going forward that is cost effective? I think the answer is there are probably a number of blueprints around that would fill the bill. Fit the bill. The question is, how much does it cost? How relevant is it? And you just expect probably that it's going to be relevant. I mean, we have a vaccine for COVID, but what about COVID variants? So we have a vaccine for COVID-19. What about the UK variant? What about the South African variant? So you could expect to see quarantining facilities needed for people coming from countries that still have high levels of COVID in the community, and therefore will need some sort of, I think, in the end, purpose-built facilities.
All right, I wanted to change the subject. Benefit numbers are out showing a record number of people moved from benefit into employment in that March quarter. What does that suggest to you?
Well, I think the government's had a really strong push on, helping people get back into work. I don't think we saw, the rebound was pretty significant in the third quarter of last year. So we haven't seen the levels of unemployment that we expected to see. The economy's been a bit patchy since then because we've had, of course, increases in alert levels. I think it's great that, people aren't spending long periods of time on the benefit, that the system is working and that, businesses can access some of the people, not all of the people that they need, not always with all of the skills that they need. Nevertheless, it's good that New Zealanders are not spending a long time out of work.
But we also need to double check those numbers, don't we? Because if you have a big drop, say, for example, in GDP, a massive drop, you go, that's terrible. But then anything that goes up looks great when you're still well below where you were.
Yeah, and I think we have to be a bit careful in that regard because, we did have a big drop, but the level of activity rebound was really strong. There is, and we are seeing a bit of this so-called K-shaped recovery. There were sectors that are really hard hit and, have very little revenue. And then there are sectors, the whole ag sectors, which are really steaming on. Part of the challenge around that upward part of the K recovery is keeping it going and making sure, that our logistics and our supply chains are strong, that, goods are able to move around the country and out of the country quickly and easily as far as that is possible, because that's the quickest way to move that bottom part of the K up into a more acceptable level.
And are you hearing that some of those delays are getting less and less in terms of course, all the containers, those movements? Yes,
sometimes. We understand that part of the challenges that we've been seeing around freight are starting to dissipate, but probably not quickly enough for many businesses.